It's this idea that we shouldn't, well, nuclear deterrence for these people, the ideologues, it translates into nuclear blackmail, which we cannot accept. So essentially, they're dismissing the whole principle of nuclear deterrence, which is puts the whole world on its head. But this is the thing that when they refer to how weakly positioned Kaliningrad is, that it's surrounded by NATO, and they say this with certain joy. I mean, that's not great. You don't want, as you said, the most nuclear armed place on the planet to feel exposed and vulnerable. And it's same as these media reports I see every day with the attacks now on the refinery in Moscow or deep in Russia. Like the news headlines as well as the politicians, they always frame it as, "Oh, look how humiliated Putin is." But again, why would this be a goal when you have Putin, which is pushing back on the hawks, which are saying, "Time to make the Western powers fear our nuclear weapons again." This is the time you want to humiliate Putin by striking deep in Russia. I mean, none of this makes any sense. It's and again, just as a last question, how do you make sense of now the narratives? Because we appear to now be entering or going back to the narrative that Ukraine is winning. Ukraine is winning. I'm not sure if it's like this in the U.S. now, but in
Oh,
Europe,
it
this
is.
is now being accepted that yes, Ukraine turned the tide and now it's winning. I mean, how are you reading? I guess the narrative war.
Well, it's exactly what it is. It's propaganda. It is an effort to um, try to sustain the course of action toward Russia that has failed since the beginning of this invasion. The idea was we crank up so much pressure on Russia that eventually Russia says uncle and it says, sorry, we made a mistake. We shouldn't have invaded. We're going to withdraw. We'll never do it again. Please forgive us. And that effort to turn the ruble into rubble, to turn Russian diplomats and politicians into international pariahs, to bring so much pressure militarily on Russia, send so many Russians home in body bags that Putin has no choice but to succumb to the pressure and capitulate. It hasn't worked. And it's not going to work. But this propaganda line that the Ukrainians are now winning, stay the course, don't lose heart, is designed to buy time. The opponents of a settlement oppose a compromise. They want Russia to capitulate. They don't want to quote unquote reward aggression in any way. They think that's very dangerous to do. So they think, we just have to continue to turn up the pressure on the Russians, and eventually they will succumb to that pressure. We won't have to give up anything in a settlement. We won't have to compromise anything. And we can end this war on our terms. And it's a fantasy. It's been proved to be a fantasy. And Konstantinovka is about to fall. I think that's going to, put the lie to this notion that the Ukrainians have turned the tide in this war, and we're going to have to face the reality that if the war is going to end, it's going to have to end in a compromise in which the Russians give up some important things, and the West and Ukraine do as well. There's no other way for this war to end unless it's going to escalate or result in Ukraine's essential, collapse as a functional state.
Yeah, I see some comparison between the war on Iran and the war on Russia. That is, by failing to recognize that the opponent sees this as an existential threat. Well, we can't because it goes against the narrative of what the war is about. By failing to accept that they see this as an existential threat, well, for good reason, we can't recognize how much pain they're willing to absorb and why capitulation isn't possible. I hear these slogans here in Europe as well. Well, if Russia leaves Ukraine, then the war is over. Well, that's not how they see it in Moscow. If they leave Ukraine, NATO follows into Ukraine. And that's existential, and it can't happen under any circumstance. But again, we can't discuss that because it goes against the narrative. So it's yeah. No, it's very strange time of politics, I think, across the West. But anyways, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, my optimism about whether we can get a compromise settlement or not has ebbed and flowed over time. After the conflict erupted between Israel, the US, and Iran, I grew very pessimistic because of the negative effects that had on prospects for peace in Ukraine. Um, the fact that the United States and Iran appear to be moving forward on this memorandum of understanding, we seem to have a basis for a compromise to end this conflict with Iran. That is a hopeful sign. It means that prospects for negotiations on Ukraine look a little brighter than they did a few weeks ago. So that's at least some cause for optimism right now.
Well, I think the diplomacy on the American side would be complicated though, because not only do they need to find an agreement with Russia, but they also have to get get the yeah, make Zelensky accept something, and of course
That's right.
make the Europeans at least yeah, think in the world as it is, not how they wish it was.
That's
So
right. This is really a battle between the Trump administration and the deep state, and that deep state is not just in Washington. It has strong links to the deep state, so to speak, in Europe. They don't want to see this compromise happen. So, question is, can he overcome that resistance? And we will see. I think the next few weeks are going to be um, there's going to be a lot of movement on this issue, and we'll get a better sense of how much progress can be made.
well, when that happens, I hope you'll come back on. So thank you very much for taking time.
Right. Thank you.